Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with Mike. Well, okay, this episode is a bit different. I'm not going to lie. So in this episode, we actually have our co-hosts as our special guests, as our interviewees from OSR Plus. So we're joined today by Daniel Quinn, Courtney Staples, and Johnny Law. And like I said up top, it's a bit of a weird one. But before we get into today's interview, I would like to remind everyone that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow some instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're over on YouTube, where you can click subscribe and the bell, all that good stuff, to listen to us alternatively. Or you can follow us on Twitter at Let's Worldbuild. If you'd rather talk to us more directly, you can always go to our Discord and chat with us about, I don't know, world building in general, or whatever you want, really. Come chat with us at the Discord with a link for that in the description. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always give us money over on Patreon, where you'll get access to sweet, sweet patron-only goodies, such as the Aphid Lounge, Too Hot for Broadcast, and 2 episodes for your prompt instead of 1. Now, with all of the shilling out of the way, let's dive right back into our interview with the crew from OSR Plus. So we already know who the hell y'all are. So tell us why you're here. Now, Daniel, you are the mastermind, the creator of OSR Plus in many ways. So why don't you take us through the journey of OSR Plus? What is it, and how did you come up with it?
Sure. I come from second edition a long time ago, and that's kind of where I started. And then actually, when I started playing with you, that's when I got involved with a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse games. And I've always wanted to work on an RPG that, for me, solved a lot of the problems I dealt with as a GM. And as you can imagine, 2E is just really has a lot of rules, especially advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And I remember during the pandemic setting up a game for my longtime friends from like 5th grade to continue a campaign that we did when we were kids. And I spent like months putting together these binders with all the stats and everything I wanted to do. And I'm like, this is just too much work. And when I was talking to John and his wife, we were like, they've never played RPGs before. I'm like, hey, why don't we get you into an RPG? And I started developing the system. And so a lot of the things that I wanted to solve for it ended up being solved while I played with them. So OSR Plus stands for Advanced Old School Revival, kind of a throwback to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And I think of it as having 3 kind of qualities that make it at least important to me. One, it still has the sort of traditional mechanics you'd expect from like an old school retro clone from D&D. But because of what I learned when I was playing with Rob and then started diving into those Powered by the Apocalypse games, it gives some of the mechanics you'd get from PBTA that lets you control the narrative as the player. And it also is pretty highly modular in the same way that AD&D was, where you can build characters from smaller components rather than it being a top-down class-based approach. So those 3 things, I think, are the kind of core of what OSR is mechanically. And I also drew inspiration when I was building it from a number of OSR games. Warrior Rogue Mage was the reason why I decided to just go with a single D6, because I was like, how simple can we start with this? And then there's another booklet called Wonders and Wickedness that had a really interesting take on magic that made it a matter of figuring out the logic rather than having lots of really wordy spells. So, as I started developing it, the players got involved. So John got back into D&D with his own brother, and we started working on it together. And then Courtney, who has a design background that you all know, she got involved both mechanically and on the design end of things. And then my longtime friend, David, who was in that game that I tried to put together after, 15 so years, he started to work on the recordings that we were doing, because we, over the past 4 years, have accumulated something like 470 hours of actual play recordings, which we use as, A, testing, and B, future material, now that we're getting the YouTube channel out there.
I just want to jump in to reestablish my street cred that DQ, you said that I had never played an RPG before, and
That's
I was
right.
actually in first edition. So
Yeah.
just want to establish the elder lines here.
Yeah.
But it was true. I hadn't played in probably 2 decades, so I was very excited when you first showed me your rough draft of the rule set you were building, and then I think it was a couple months later that it was before pandemic, but that's what really took off. But I think you're like, hey, do you want to play a game? Let's get, Allie and I had moved away from New England down to PA. So I was like, hey, let's reconnect this way with our buddy Kat and the other two of us.
And then your brother got back into it too, right? Like he got back into regular D&D once he started us playing.
Yeah. He was my original DM, and he started playing. He got his daughter and his wife and his neighbor's kid. He just started kind of messing around with that, and then we turned that into a whole family thing. And then eventually you got in with our buddy Jay, and so we got a little 5e in there.
Yeah, and I got into it. Daniel actually invited me to be on a episode of Dungeons and Flagons, which is something that John hosts and Daniel GMs. And as the name implies, it involves drinking, sometimes rather heavily, and playing a sort of parody version of this game. And that was the first time that I'd played the OSR Plus system. And despite never having played it before, and despite imbibing a number of beverages that night, I still learned it in one go. I was able to make a character. I was able to understand the rules and just dive right in and had a blast with it.
What a tagline for OSR Plus. OSR Plus, you can play shit-faced.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's true.
Oh yeah, fuck yeah.
We have actually had, I think, at least 2 players who have never played an RPG before play their first time ever on a Dungeons and Flagons, and they get it and they get into it and they're really have a lot of fun with it.
And good.
Yeah, they do a really great job. And I don't know if the alcohol helps or hurts that, but anyway, so I got kind of involved in some more games, and then I think Daniel, I probably was talking to you about the site layout and stuff like that, and you asked would I like to be a part of the core team and focus on art and design and visual aesthetic stuff. So yeah, I joined in and kind of ended up doing some other stuff too, like copy editing and some mechanics discussions, even though those aren't my favorite, and things like that. So it's been a lot of fun though.
You always bring a unique perspective to the mechanic conversation, though.
Yeah,
nice rounding.
But usually the two of them get together and they make me realize that I'm being ridiculous. So
yeah, that happens sometimes.
Wait, what, Daniel? What? No, oh man.
I mean, just to piggyback on that, I think one of the things that really works though is that, especially with the 3 of us, that we all take criticism very openly from each other.
Yeah.
And it's not a oh fuck, fine, yeah, okay, I'll do that. But we really kind of feed off it. Even yesterday, I was editing. We started putting out shorts on the OSR Plus YouTube channel, just showing what Dungeons and Flagons and how ridiculous it is. And I came up with this idea. I was oh, I have all this empty space. What if we put a logo here and do this? And I show it to them, and they're like, yeah, that's a cool idea, but and then 2 hours later, I'm finally back to editing because we went through all the different things to fix the logo and change the opacity of it and all this stuff that I would never think of. And then I go back and look at my original mock-up, and I'm like, oh my God, that looks like dog shit. Why? How they not laugh at me when I mean, they probably have a separate channel where they're laughing at me, but
no, I mean, there's layers that the same thing happens to me when I look at something I made that then Courtney revised. I'm like, Jesus, this is so hideous compared to what she did. So it's this layers of that.
But it works well. But in the same thing, DQ will be in my defense, he'll be like, oh, I can't figure out how to do this this mechanic. And I'm like, yeah, we could just do this and this and that and that. And he's like, oh, all right.
Yeah, it works. Yeah, it works.
Yeah, it's all been very collaborative, and sometimes we'll disagree on something, and then a week later it's wait a second, we have a way to compromise now, or we see the other's point and we can work through it. So it's been a really good team effort, I would say.
Just like how it should be at your table, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you said that you've been working on this pre-pandemic, right? So this clearly has been in design for quite a long time, under development for quite a while. Writing should be easy. So why has it taken you so long for you to write OSR Plus? Explain that process for us.
Yeah. As you can imagine, the writing of any text requires a lot of revision. And in role-playing games, they also require testing, which is unique to these particular types of games as compared to other texts. And in fact, I have, I don't know, like 4 or 5 full 60, 70 page drafts of earlier versions of this. And I think in the beginning it had to evolve out of being some sort of fantasy heartbreaker. And the questions I asked myself when I was, be onboarding like John and Allie and Kat had never played an RPG before. I think Allie never played. John had played when he was really young in 1E. And I was like, well, this needs to be something where we can get immersed really quickly and not have to think about the rules. And I, as a GM, don't want to be bogged down by it either. I want to be able to run adventures and have fun and make it quick. I want to spend 2 hours putting an adventure together, not like a month, right? And looking at some horrible adventure module that I had to wrangle to make work. So it took so long because I was constantly revising. And then once, John and Courtney were collaborating, we started revising individual components of the system till I think today, I think we honestly the past month over PAX, we're bolting on one last piece, I think. And then it'll really be system complete, I feel like. But it took so long because it required feedback and testing. And I think when you're designing any system, you have to do that. Otherwise, it's just theory crafting and, you're just like, what do you call it? Circle jerking. That's pointless.
I'd also like to add that DQ, and for the folks listening, Daniel equals DQ. That's just how I know him. But DQ also has built everything himself from the ground up. Like the whole website, everything is him. I mean, I think he had a little bit of help with like icons back in the day, but you've replaced those since then with ones that you generated yourself. And on top of that, this isn't his job. No one's paying him for it. So he's got a job, family life at home. And then he's been building this amazing system and website himself. So that's also, I would think that would take some time,
Oh God, the website. We have at least 3 iterations of that too. There's one iteration you guys never even saw.
Yeah.
That I just trashed.
Yeah.
Horrible.
So that's one thing that I was trying to get at as well, is the fact that you're completely underselling the fact that you have a fully integrated character creator set up through the website that gives you a quick and easy way into the system, right? It's not like you have to send somebody a PDF and then they have to read through that PDF and they have to flip back and forth to figure out which subclass that they want to use and which race they want to use. Daniel, the fact that you are either like way past it and you've forgotten all of the hard work that you've put into that website, or you're really just that humble, and I know you, so I know that's not it. So I think it's mostly the exhaustion that's kicked in at this point. The fact that you have a fully operable character creator that is integrated within the system itself is incredibly impressive. And you should be proud of that system.
Damn straight.
I kind of forgot. I did kind of honestly forget.
I know you did, Daniel. I know you did.
It's like mothers who give birth and their hormones make them forget.
Yes.
That's what Daniel's gone through here.
I'm sitting here trying to do my best as the interviewer, lobbing you like the softest of softballs so you can knock them out the park. And you're like, I don't know, writing's hard, iterative process, whatever. And it's like, you forgot the fucking website, Daniel. You wrote a whole ass website.
So, I got to jump in with my sales pitch here. That speaking of the character creator, that for all those listening, if you go to osrplus.com and make a free account, you have access to the complete character creator, as well as the core rules, as well as a GM manual, which is literally a book, a philosophy book on running TTRPGs in the OSR Plus system. So that's all free. That will always be free. Check it out.
Damn.
Yeah. I guess the one thing to say too about the system, one of the things I wanted to make the web portion of it, the technical portion of it, capable of was, we have lots of campaign settings, which we call worlds of OSR Plus, that we have been playing in and documenting, and they're recorded. There's at least I'd say 8 or 9 of them. That down the line, we would like these to be physical books that you can buy, right? But the idea with the website is that we can plug them into the website and automatically they become part of the whole system. So you end up with all the rules getting ported directly into the character builder. That way we can rapidly deploy these things. So, when there's a physical book for the core rules and the Game Master's Guide, our hope is that then we can release one after the other of these adventure modules, and then the website automatically supports that. So you can go into the character builder, you can make a new hero, and your hero can use special rules from, say, God Beyond the Portal or The Long Night, which are some of the random, adventures we've created. And The reality is the web is constantly changing, and who knows how long, how many times I'll have to revise the site. But the idea is that the system was designed to be deeply integrated with technology. You can play it at the table, but you can also play it remotely. And in fact, 99% of what we do is remote these days, as far as the gaming goes in our circle.
Yeah, and having it be fully online just makes it so convenient to do anything with. I mean, like Daniel said, we've been playing online, playing remotely, which lets us play with, John's in Pennsylvania, Daniel and I are in Massachusetts, David's in Florida. So we can all get together around this virtual table and have a good time, and everybody can reference everything super easily. We don't have to, flip through 100+ page books to find out the rules. You can just search, everything's on there. And like John said, it's all free.
It's also fun too when I'm like on a different forum or a different Discord, and someone's like, "Oh, how do I do a chase scene in 5e? Like, I don't like the rules that they have in the Dungeon Master's Guide." And then I'm like, "Oh, check out this. You're gonna have to convert things because it's a D6 system, not a D20 system. But like, you can take inspiration from this." And I just drop the link to the website, and it's anyone can go. You don't have to access anything. You don't have to sign in. It's not like D&D Beyond where you have to have an account and everything all set up. Just right there.
I know that we're supposed to be talking about OSR Plus, but can we all just sit here and discuss for a moment how fucking dog shit the 5e Dungeon Master's Guide is? It's so fucking terrible. Sorry. Okay, we'll get back to the OSR Plus stuff now, but I couldn't let that stand. I couldn't sit there and not talk about how terrible it is. Even Justin Alexander's talked about it. But anyway, so Daniel, okay, you were talking about like worlds of OSR Plus. Now, can you explain a little bit more of like what that looks like? How is that integrated? And for example, like, could we have like a world build with a setting integrated into the system somehow?
Yes, that is our plan. I mean, that was one of the things I had in mind in the beginning, being able to port over Worldbuild with us settings and turn them into OSR settings. On the technical end of things, take, for example, God Beyond the Portal. This is a kind of a supernatural horror game that we've been playing. So what the setting introduces, obviously, is the physical location of the setting and all the lore that comes with it. It introduces special mechanics called archetypes, which are sort of like, they're equivalent to the playbooks in PBTA. They're genre-focused roles that your characters play that sit on top of your other mechanics, like your class and your kit and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
It introduces special mechanics that are unique to the setting. So in the case of God Beyond the Portal, there's horror mechanics and there's stress mechanics. Mm-hmm. Then it introduces, things like a music playlist and art. And if there were in the future a physical book that you could get that has the adventure in it. So it's the same as having like a Forgotten Realms setting, but they're much smaller in scope because we want to rapidly release them. And then if you go to the website, we do have premium subscriptions where if you're subscribed, you then have access to every setting that will ever be produced as long as you're subscribed. So you can use it in the character builder. But even if you didn't have that, you can still access the rules like on the website and potentially, buy the book would be nice. So the idea is that there are version of expanding the rules with campaign settings, but they typically would be very genre specific. So we've run a lot of crazy things in the system so far. We've done sword and sorcery. The main staple is a sword and sorcery one called The Quest of Queens. We've done high fantasy kind of Harry Potter game. We've done like a Planescape-esque adventure in our version of the Astral called the Astral Veil. We've done steampunk kind of fantasy, and that was The Long Night. So we have a whole bunch of ones that we've tested and run, but because we run 6 or 7 games every month in our Discord sometimes with strangers and among ourselves, we're ahead of the actual production of the thing. So we'll run something completely, test it, record it. It's good to go so that, it works. It's integrated with the system as far as the content goes. But then it's like, okay, but eventually we're gonna have to go back, release those recordings, produce the actual text for it. And once we have, publishing mechanism in place, put that book out. So it's a strange situation where we're ahead of our own content, catch up with it.
And speaking of World Build with Us settings, Ride the Lightning is one that was taken from Land of a Thousand Tracks that Daniel adapted, and it's a absolutely crazy
oh boy, is it
2 or 3 parter.
Rob played that one.
Yeah,
I did
Crashlander, right?
Yeah, that was me. Oh boy, that was a crazy one.
That was amazing.
That was fun. Yeah.
One day I will play a OSR Plus game where I'm not a complete psychopath. But
He got saddled with a lot of psychopaths, like DNF. He got handed the literal psychopath.
DNF. He was an edgelord.
Oh, I was an edgelord psychopath in the Dungeons and Flagons one.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Also, Fear the Light, which is our actual play that's up on YouTube. That was also World Build with Us setting. And on top of that, we started playing around with a new format that's kind of like the serious Dungeons and Flagons, or semi-serious, that we're calling TBD RPG. Yeah. And in that, we actually, so in Dungeons and Flagons, we roll up a wacky scenario using tables and a D20, but each character also rolls up 2 adjectives and then either their kit or class. And the adjectives are really off the wall and lewd and wacky, whatever. But in this one, we rolling up the flaws and the conflicts, right? Which are mechanics in the game.
I think that was also like an archetype from popular fiction.
Popular culture, fiction, whatever. So we've run that
Twice,
yeah. And the second time we did a little bit more world building as well, right?
Yeah.
C.R. Ronson was on it with us.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's right. But yes, that TBD RPG definitely takes a lot of cues off of what you guys do on World Build with us. And instead of just making this game that we talk about and imagine as a video game or a tabletop RPG, we actually then play it. So we pack the world together. DQ goes and starts building his adventure while whoever's left as players will just start talking and start figuring out, what our deeper bonds are in between us. And then we go right into it. And we're doing another one this Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
I don't even know what's happening anymore.
And they only take 3 to 4 hours, the TBD RPGs, which is impressive given that we're creating a world, creating characters, figuring out how our characters are linked, and also playing the actual game, the one shot.
And we've also been playing around with a quick session 0, like kind of jam. We've been playing around with that idea of doing kind of the same thing, like getting prompts and then just running with it and build as if we were going to play a whole campaign. But then that's just more of a theoretical thing, which is a lot of fun. Which I would also like to mention, the session 0s in OSR Plus are very different from your typical session 0. In that most session 0s, you just focus on what the structure of the campaign is going to be, what the expectations are, what the safety measures are, which are all very important and all very great things. OSR Plus takes it a step or 2 further by actually giving a promise of a premise of like, this is what it's going to be. Here is basically a slideshow to get you in the headspace, and then hands it over to the players and says, flesh out the rest of this world. Let's figure out, what do these factions mean? Who belongs to them? What brings you all to the table? And how do you know each other? And what story hooks reside within you that we will continue to flesh out as we play?
Yeah, and I can attest to that as well as someone who's played in one of those OSR Plus games. Actually, I take it back. I wasn't a complete psychopath in that one.
Yeah, you played an early version of God Beyond the Portal. You had a very deep character.
Oh yeah, that was a great early game as well. I actually played with John's brother in that series. Yeah,
and you also helped us fix a fighting mechanic. So thank you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's discovered a bunch of exploits.
I enjoy finding character exploits. It's the fun part.
He's very tactical.
It's playtesting, though. That's the part of the
Exactly. I'm like, I'm going to break this. My character is invincible now. Sorry.
I mean, he also helped begin the road of figuring out how to mechanize some dramatic stuff that happens. So like you get monologues in that one just naturally because that's what you do like as a GM, as a player. And later on we decided, well, there should be a mechanical reward or interaction for doing that in the system. And so now a monologue is actually a thing you can do.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, which I love that it brings in those things that you can do in other RPGs and makes it a mechanical thing that you are rewarded for, like the fact that conflicts and flaws are built into your character and you can get rewards for using them and acting in that way, or the issue of alignment or ethos in OSR Plus, where you can get rewarded for acting like in line with what you believe in as a character. And then the monologue thing, which like I've done a couple times now too, and it's really fun.
Fantastically.
My God, they're good ones.
You made me cry.
I know. I know.
It might be worth going back to what John was saying about session zero, because I think that speaks to sort of the heart of what I intended with it. Like in each RPG, there's a different kind of goal depending on what the designer wanted. Like you can argue, for example, that in 5e, part of it is gaining power and becoming more powerful and getting more options so you can do more things. And that's one of the goals in the game. And in Powered by the Apocalypse, for example, one of the things that's argued in it is that part of discovering your character's interiority is at the heart of what the game is about. And in OSR Plus, I wanted, I always, when I play an RPG personally, I want to be able to be the hero I set out to be and accomplish the things that make sense for his kind of destiny. So whether I'm like some evil wizard who's trying to become a lich, or whether I'm like the paladin trying to save the kingdom, like I want to fulfill my destiny, right? And in order to do that, the game has to give me like opportunities to do that. And I might fail and I might succeed. I don't know, that's what playing ends up letting me do. But the reason why I mention that is because we then designed it so that the system will actually let you do that. So in session zero, what the GM is trying to do is tease out what we call story hooks, so that we can understand the things that the player is interested in doing as part of their character's destiny. And then the GM goes back and a kind of Justin Alexander style develops what he calls nodes to put together the adventure. And in those nodes, there are those story hooks. That way the player can interact with that and then start to fulfill their destiny, or in the terms of the game, like resolve their conflict. And in the Game Master's Guide that I wrote, it talks you through how to do that as a GM. And I think session zero is super important because you can't build the adventure and actually have the player do the thing that the game is about unless you tease out those story hooks.
Yeah, and speaking of session zeros, John was on an Aphidange episode recently with Daniel and I that should be out by the time this episode airs, where we actually ran sort of a mini sample condensed session zero in the OSR Plus style and had a lot of fun with it. So if you are a giant aphid or God Pacted patron, you'll have access to that, and you can check it out on our Patreon.
Now, we've been talking a lot about OSR Plus, the journey, part of the mechanics, and kind of how it's manifested itself. I want to give you guys the opportunity to really talk about the mechanical aspect. Like, how does OSR play? Like, obviously, we've talked about how fast and easy it is to get into it, but let's talk about the conflict resolution mechanics, right? Daniel said it's like 2d6 to kind of roll the stats and everything, but how do the classes break down? How do you really make manifest the unique identity for your character?
At its core, there's 3 resolution mechanics, and OSR Plus borrows from PBTA and the old school style in different ways. And I can get to why that is, but the system uses 1d6 and it has advantage and disadvantage. And the 3 sorts of mechanics, or the 3 tools that the GM can reach for are either, a roll against a flat TN, which is what you'd expect from something more traditional like 5e. Success at a cost, where you can't really fail, but we're measuring how well you did. And that tends to be the core mechanic in PBTA, where, success at a cost tends to be the average roll. And then we also have the option to roll for an entire scene and break that scene down involving the entire party. And that tends to be something you'd see maybe in like Burning Wheel for some of the more dramatic stuff. And the reason why we structured it that way is because I wanted the GM to have what I call tools, not rules. And in the OSR style, that's usually phrased as rulings over rules. So the rules are written in a very terse, simple, short way. That way there's gaps in the understanding, and the GM can step in and, make those rulings, choose the mechanic to solve the problem. And at its core, the roll is a d6, plus your attribute, just so you expect. The attributes range from 1 to 7, but they go up to 11 depending on how powerful you get. You can add a skill. You can add a story tag, so that's an additional +2. So technically, a +4 is the max. And the story tags derive from your character's conflicts and flaws. So if I'm like a the hunted, right? I might have a story tag that's something like fast on my feet because I've been chased by people. And I can apply that narratively, and that's it's a mechanic that's part of the narrative rather than my character, on top of my skill, say reflexes, and then I add my attribute and I roll that d6. So the numbers stay pretty small, and the idea is that every time I'm rolling, I'm thinking about what's happening in the fiction, and then I model, the action that I'm taking to measure up to what's happening with the roll.
Yeah, to piggyback on what DQ said, one of the cool things about OSR Plus is that every action you want to do starts off with a conversation between the player and the GM. And most people think, well, that's what normally happens. Like, if you're playing 5e and you're like, I want to climb this wall, they'll be like, make an athletics check, which is funny because you can't do acrobatics. It has to be athletics when you're climbing and jumping. Anyway, that's a stupid roll. But that's all it is. It's, okay, are you proficient in athletics? You can add this to it, blah, blah, blah. And, what's your stat that applies to that strength? Okay, blah, 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 blah. You hit the button if you're on, a VTT, and it rolls the dice for you, and that's it. In OSR Plus, you're like, I want to climb this wall. And then the GM says, okay, you want to climb that wall over here with the ladder, or you want to climb that wall that's like sheer wet face? You're like, no, I want the sheer wet face because I'm an idiot. And then you'd be like, oh, okay, well, how are you going about that? And you're like, well, I'm going to like scope it out. And I notice that there are handholds there, but also I have this rope on me. So I'm going to actually declare that I have a supply of a grappling hook and rope, and I'm going to throw that up there. And you start to build on things. It's not just this like, here's what you want to do. Okay, here's the rule to do it. It's a conversation. It's a flowing, organic thing, and becomes collaborative. And you can, also kind of bargain and finagle your way into things. And I'll be like, oh, I want to, start a riot in this place. And, the GM will ask you, are you going to start like punching people? Or like, no, I'm gonna try to knock over something so it hits someone and they think someone else did it. And he's like, okay, well, that's more of a death move. And then it would be mighty of just going in there. So there's ways to work around and work the story into your actions that is then further supported by whatever the mechanics that would be to resolve that check.
Yeah, and the dimensions too of that, there's only 3, which makes it really easy for the GM. There's Mighty, Deaf, Smart. And, there's nothing innovative about that. It's intentionally boring because that's what we expect, those 3 dimensions of the stats. And when you apply like a skill to it, it's not like you're pushing the button on your sheet to say like, I'm going to use acrobatics and that explains what's happening in the fiction. It's more like, well, I happen to have domain knowledge psychology, so I'm going to apply that to my conversation with the guard because I'm going to trick him into thinking that I'm supposed to be here, right? Because that will help me in my role. So at every step, you have to interrogate the fiction and then work with the GM to figure out how you model that action with the role.
Yeah, and I would say that the Mighty, Deaf, Smart takes a bit of getting used to if you're coming from like a more typical RPG like D&D where you have the 6 attributes, because it can take a little bit getting used to like, okay, Mighty represents physical strength, but also like willpower and inner strength. And Deft represents physical dexterity and agility, but also it can be like wit and how charming you are, which can also lead to some really interesting characters that, you might think, oh, if I just build an idiot who has like maxed out Mighty, no smart at all, he's just not going to be able to contribute anything to conversations, or he won't be able to navigate socially, but you can still have him do really interesting and fun things because of that sort of overlap.
Yeah. And this also carries over into combat as well, which is one of my favorite things in all TTRPGs is combat. And I like to play melee players. I like to play marshals. And we've been doing a good job, I think, of making them a little bit more built up and be able to compare, get that divide smaller. But when you're in combat, you're obviously, there are checks to see if you can hit things, whatever, but you can also bring in the fiction. There's a mechanic called fate points, which actually allows you to change the fiction to your advantage as a player. And then so like in a recent game, my cocky noble took a shot at this giant monster and just missed him, but I used a fate point and got to add a exploded die on top of that. And we narrated it as that it ricocheted, because he's kind of a lucky bastard. And it like ricocheted off something and hit the monster in the back of the head. But beyond just the physical aspects of combat, the spell and the spell design, you could do some crazy stuff. Like we had a newer player in a situation where her character was being attacked by a zombie, and her whole thing was that her character was like, didn't know she had the powers until she used them, and was like kind of discovering it herself. And she used a spell called Rainbow Bridge. And the way that spell was meant to be used is that you make a bridge over a gap, and anyone standing on it, which is we would think would be your friends, gets transported across this bridge to the other side of the gap. Nope, she used it on the monster and shot him out a window, because as it's written, as it can be interpreted, whoever's standing on it can make a check against it, but then they're thrown out the window. And I was like, holy shit. Like, this is just your second RPG you've ever played? And the first one was a drunken thing? Okay, impressive.
Yeah, and like speaking also to more of the spell versatility is like in that same short campaign, I was playing a cleric who was all about healing and holy divine energy and stuff. And I had the spell that could let me turn liquids into holy water. And we were, facing off against zombies a lot of the time. And at one point I was kind of cornered in a body of water with zombies rapidly approaching. And I was like, wait, can I just turn this whole body of water into holy water? Like, does that work? Yes. Okay, cool. And stuff like that, or turning, rain into holy water. And it gives you a lot of freedom. I think in part because of how cleanly the spells are written. They're not, if you're used to looking at D&D spells, you think of like this massive wall of text that has all these mechanical things in it and distances and cones and areas of effect and so on. But this is much more simple, much easier to just sort of use your imagination to tell the story that you'd like to tell.
Although it plays well on virtual tabletops using maps and stuff like that, there was playtesting. It is definitely built for theater of the mind, and like that's even I've run two short-lived campaigns because they're kids, but for like 9-year-olds, and it was hilarious just being able to like just throw up an image on a TV, and I'm playing in person, and like, oh, here's a Yeti. What do you want to do? And like the ideas that they would come up with, is staying within the rules of OSR Plus, and me not having to fudge anything, but just kind of talk with these kids and see how they would do things. It was amazing how they work and how just their unsullied minds could just come up with these great solutions and conflict resolution.
Yeah, I think part of the way that we try to solve for that in the system is like there's two things. One is the gaps, like intentional gaps. So like Courtney was saying, a spell is a paragraph and it leaves a lot of room for interpretation on purpose. But then on top of that, there is a logic behind them such that you can reason your way out how things should work. And this is explained in depth in the Game Master's Guide, even in the core rules. But what that lets you do is instead of having to figure out, okay, well, how far can the spell affect someone? And like, is it an area of effect of a cone, like you were saying, or is it 66 damage, all that nonsense? Everything is scalable for the mage. So that depending on how much power the mage wants to put into something, all the parameters of the spell expand. And so situationally, they can decide how powerful their effects are. And because there's a built-in logic, it's a lot easier to extrapolate for both the GM and the player. They don't need to reference something because they know, for example, if they put in 5 MP, that means the spell is going to last 5, rounds plus their level. Like that's the case for all the spells. And there's not spell levels. There's very little fiddly bits. One of the things I really missed from 2E, for example, that's where it came from, is I always wanted to cast the really cool spells. Like, who doesn't want to cast like, the 9th level spells or the 7th level spells? But how many times do you get to the level to be able to actually use those spells? So in OSR Plus, every spell is available to you at level 1. It's just a matter of how powerful its effects can be, depending on how powerful you are. So things like that. I wanted to keep things simple and accessible and fun and usable more than anything else.
Another cool thing with the logic overriding the mechanics is that if your character was to catch on fire, in 5e, whatever thing caught you on fire would have a rule of what the check you're supposed to make, how you determine that target number for the check, blah, blah, blah. And then that would probably take your action to do it. In OSR Plus, it could take your action, but you could also maybe argue with your DM that it takes your movement, that you're able to like stop, drop, and roll, and then do something else. Like there's a lot of room for GM fiat. There's a lot of room for the rule of cool to override what would be just, in other systems, a strictly mechanical thing. And like you said, there's gaps, not just in the spell design, but there's gaps just in the overall approach to how you play.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify that gaps doesn't mean frustratingly vague. Like yes. I'm a person who really likes concrete, this is what it is kind of things, but it gives you just enough freedom to feel like fantastical in what you're doing and to be able to, not just hurl 10d6 damage dealing fireballs, but to do anything with the fire ability that you have, and so on. And like, it's more about flexibility than anything, I think.
Man, I really got to get my hands on a spellcaster in OSR Plus because I
Yeah.
feel like,
Ooh, like-
Yeah.
much like John, I am a big fan of martials, but I feel like if I had my hands on some magic,
Oh,
I'd
yeah.
have a lot of
It's
fun.
crazy, man.
It's fun, yeah.
I mean, I have to say that, like, so Wonders and Wickedness that I mentioned in the beginning, and some just other similar OSR systems like this that reinterpreted how magic could work in the old school style. That's kind of where I borrowed the idea, and then I built on top of that. For example, Maleficence, which is what Courtney was referencing, is none of the spells in the system do damage, not a single one. They're all intended to alter reality in some way. But wizards have this power called Maleficence, which is kind of like an X-Men ability. Like if I took the cold Maleficence, I can do anything that Iceman could do, like as I can imagine. And that's the thing that does damage for them. So the reason why, that Maleficence isn't defined is because, you could decide to freeze the ground so the guards slip. You could freeze the lock so you can get through the door. You could just blast someone with an ice bolt. All those things are possible, and the rules let you do it like out of box.
Yeah, that was always one of my pain points with other RPGs, is how restrictive they can end up feeling, in that you might have a certain idea in mind for your character, but that build isn't optimal, or you'd be better off, taking a different spell. And it was always annoying to know, like, I've got to decide between, oh, the spell is perfect for my character. It fits her exactly what she is, but it's kind of shitty compared to, fireball or chain lightning or whatever.
Yeah, you want to do damage, you got to take fireball. It can't be an ice
Right.
ball, it can't be a lightning ball or an acid ball or a sound ball. You've got to
Right.
take fireball. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and this lets you build kind of anything that you want, which is really great to have that freedom.
But there's also plenty of room for rules lawyers like myself to actually trust me. I mean, as much as the other players at the table might hate that I remind the GM that there's.
I love you.
I love you
Help
too,
me.
DJ. We don't have to go into that though. There'll be a whole nother episode.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really love about the system is just how creative it allows the players to be. And at the same time, it seems like a really easy game to run as well. Like, it feels very GM forward with a lot of collaboration in mind for the players as well. Daniel, do you want to talk a little bit about like how you, because you're mostly the GM for this game. So do you want to talk about how you designed both the GM guide and the game itself to kind of help facilitate those kinds of stories for GMs?
Yeah. I would say the biggest credit I have to give is obviously our hero, Justin Alexander, right? Because, there's other episodes we recorded with him, but where he talks about how to think about an adventure structure. And so when in the beginning, I didn't know about this because you had introduced me to it. But once I found out about it, I reconsidered, okay, well, how do we make use of this in the tools that the game gives for GMs to build adventures? So Session 0 is a huge part of that because it gives you the story hooks to then put together your nodes that the players can bounce around in. But beyond that, and setting up the actual adventure, I wanted everything to be really simple and quick. That way the GM is only spending maybe a couple hours to put together an adventure. And as we can see in TBD and Dungeons and Flagons, you can do it in 30 minutes if you want to. One of the ways we do that is what I call NPC shorthand. And it's a shorthand way of writing out monster stats or NPC stats that you can do literally on a note card. And you could do it in your head. Like, you don't have to look anything up necessarily to put these creatures together. And I've demonstrated this when we run these quick one shots. Everything's short paragraphs in the actual rules, and there's only a certain number of status effects and a certain number of forms of damage. And there's a lot of freedom for the GM to create stuff that's still within the bounds of the rules that all can be expressed in NPC shorthand. So that's described on the website. We talked about tools, not rules. So the rules are meant that you don't have to constantly reference in them. Instead, the GM can just pick from the 3 core mechanics and riff off that in order to solve any possible situation. And while there are, given rules for certain things, especially in combat, because that game mode is more specific, other game modes give you a lot more freedom. Like, we have the overworld, which is a way of conducting play outside of your characters. So if you're doing like a big war that's happening, or maybe like you're traversing the city and seeing what's happening between factions, the sort of thing you'd see in PBTA of like fronts and the way they express that's expressed through the overworld. So across all the game modes, the other ones being exploration, downtime, which we didn't even get to, all the mechanics are the same. That way, it's really easy for the GM to transition between them, and nothing is too fiddly. There's not many dials to deal with. And so I would say if you were interested in checking it out, to definitely read the Game Master's Guide, because it lays out not only the philosophy, but also like, how do we use these rules in this particular game? And, how do I build an adventure? It's all there for you.
For free.
For free. Yeah, I've got to say, we could sit here for hours discussing all the ins and outs of the OSR Plus, but we have yearning questions from our patrons that we have to get to. Plus, there's no reason that we can't turn this into an Aphid Lounge or just have you back on for a second episode, right? Obviously, I have your numbers, so
yeah, we're around.
Be terribly hard, Yeah, not like we talk every week or anything like that. Yeah, all right. So let's go ahead and jump right into those patron-only questions. So Commissar Whiskers wants to know, how would you build the classic lawful stupid paladin? I'm assuming they mean lawful stupid and not like a nuanced, interesting, lawful good character. I am a big fan of playing lawful good characters in general, but that's neither here nor there. So Daniel, Courtney, John, how do we deal with this? What are we looking at here?
So lawful stupid, do we mean, because my understanding of that typically is like a stupidly lawful good character who's a goody two-shoes. Do we mean that, or do we mean something like Javert from Les Mis?
I think, in my understanding, the lawful stupid aspect basically restricts the fun from other characters. That's why I don't think that Commissar Whiskers is asking how to be. Yeah.
Okay. Javert is not lawful stupid. All right, that's a man that it's black and white morality, but he's not lawful stupid.
I would argue he's like
rage right now. If you want to get into this,
I would argue the reason why I ask is he's like kind of like a lawful neutral character. But okay,
yes,
so
definitely.
This way, so if we're talking lawful stupid, your typical goody two shoes paladin who can't do anything that breaks his moral codes, and he tells everyone else, don't torture that guy and don't hit that guy, and he's just constantly complaining about misbehavior of all of his murder hobo companions. The system has something called ethos, and ethos is a version of alignment that we reinterpreted to mean it's a way of divorcing good and evil as concepts from the axes. So instead of good and evil, we're talking about things like altruism and egotism, and we're talking about duty and justice. So the axes are slightly different. So in OSR Plus, a lawful good character would be someone who's obviously altruistic because he cares about the welfare of other people, but he also acts on principle. Like he has a strict moral code that he follows. The totality of that is called guardian. So we have these sort of profiles for each of the traditional alignments that relate more to what we'd expect out of classic moral philosophy, something that is meaningful rather than everybody kind of debating what does good mean, what does evil mean, like that. These questions are too relative. And so in this system, in ethos, we have new axes to use. That way you could play a campaign, say, where you're all pirates and your goals as pirates is to steal shit and burn places and be jerks, right? And so you're clearly all egotists because you're out for yourselves. And maybe in that came the definition of good is egotism, is to be selfish. And the bad guys are the buccaneers who have come out of the neighboring country who want to establish order and make you pay taxes and care about the welfare of your friends. And you're like, fuck them. I'm a selfish bastard, and that's good. So in that campaign, the GM would define good that way. So that's why I think it's important to have ethos, because it lets you set up your setting in a way for interesting conversations and interesting adventures. You can play your classic Lord of the Rings heroic fantasy where everybody's altruistic, and then lawful good would be your superhero.
Yeah, John did point out to me that I did play a lawful stupid character, which I pushed back against at first, and then I realized that one of his flaw tags is literally lawful stupid. That was a cleric inquisitor character that I played in a campaign that's ended now, and I would not define him as good at all. He actively tortured people a lot, but he was very law-abiding, was basically like a Judge Dredd kind of figure. And unfortunately, the sort of authority figure in our group ended up being Daniel's character, who was very evil. So I just followed orders, and yeah.
and one way you can interpret that, like lawful here, when we talk about ethos, right? The word instead isn't lawful. We don't use that. We have a different purpose for it. What that means is acting on principle. So your, Judge Dredd-esque character, his principles are that to be aligned with the state. And my egotistical, mastermind character represented the state, right?
Yeah.
So, for him to follow his principles is literally to follow the letter of the law. It can mean other things, right? And so that's what I mean by he's stupid. Like he like is very rigidly following those laws, and he doesn't care about egotism or altruism. So he's skeptic. He's in the middle. He's neutral.
Yeah, so he was adjudicator, so he was that the closest parallel to the alignment would be lawful neutral, right? But more importantly, like you're saying, it's not that he's like in the middle of like good and evil. That's not at all. He's just not looking out for the good of the people. He's looking out for the good of the state. And and the tag of adjudicator, it says you do what must be done according to the dictates of your religion or creed at great risk to your life or reputation. Like that's how, if he wanted to make a sacrifice on his ethos, that's what he would have to do. And we didn't have that mechanic in that game at the time, but you would have definitely gotten a lot of fate points back.
Yeah.
By the way you acted.
I think I did actually use it at least once or twice.
Oh, did you? Oh,
I think so. Yeah.
It's all blurred.
Like the system then rewards you. So like if you fulfill your ethos at great cost to yourself, then the GM gives you a fate point, and fate points let you do is control the narrative. So it becomes, like if the game is about fulfilling your destiny as a character, controlling the narrative so you can do that is something you want, and that's how it rewards you.
Yeah, to not really answer Commissar Whisker's question, is I think there are a lot of ways to build lawful stupid. Like, to be the classic paladin figure, you could be the paladin class, you could be the cleric class, you could kind of be any class you want because of the modularity of the system. It lets you be flexible in how you interpret, your powers and where they come from. And there are also the kits that add more mechanics, more flavor to your character. So like I said, my character was a cleric class with a kit of Inquisitor, which let him interrogate people, basically. So there's not an easy answer to how exactly to build lawful stupid, other than you can do it in so many ways.
Yeah. Just name the character you want to emulate from popular culture, fiction, whatever, or history. I can guarantee you can do it, and if you can't, then we're adding that as a kit or class or origin somehow. That's what we're looking for as gaps.
Yeah,
like all our kits come from genre, so it's like we don't start by thinking like, oh, I want to have a character that uses the shield to attack, right? Like that's not a genre, that's not a concept. We start with something that's like, well, I want to be a Valkyrie, leader of the people, Joan of Arc character. That's something we know of. No, it's genre is the wrong word for it. That's something that's like a trope that exists in fiction, right? So the kit Valkyrie exists for that. So if there's a trope we're missing, we will add it. Yeah,
damn straight.
Well, we're going to move on to another patron of ours, Kaiser, who says, and we've talked about this a little bit, but Kaiser wants to know, how in depth does this go, and is it possible to homebrew within the system?
Oh, yeah. I would say that playing the game is a practice in homebrewing. We have in the Game Master's Guide explanations of how to homebrew every aspect of it. But as a GM, you're actively homebrewing. Like it's meant for you to take the toolbox and build whatever you want with it. So it's not like a top down, it's a bottom up sort of way to play it.
I'm looking at it now. There's literally a section that it's called homebrew, and it goes over different subsections of spells, origins, classes, kits, archetypes, stances, treasure. Like it really is. It's you kind of thought of everything, didn't you, buddy?
I tried with all the cocaine. I'm out of cocaine now.
Kaiser would be so pissed that was the answer.
I would say to Kaiser, check out the homebrew section. You could. This is not a straitjacket system. It is a toolbox.
Yeah,
that's the best way I can describe it.
Great. So we also have another question from one Diploraptor, where Diplo wants to know, how do you feel about the tendency for old school revival games to encourage and or bring out negative attitudes often found underlying within the role-playing game community, drawing out often negative or vindictive / self-righteous opinions about how this is the right or correct way to game, and you not enjoying the high lethality makes you not a real gamer. You know, gatekeeping that is often a hallmark of OSR style titles. What a mouthful. Okay.
Wow.
Daniel, I'm sure that you have a lot of
Yeah.
opinions about this. So why don't you go first?
So I mean, first I think we take a step back and ask what is the old school revival style, and there's a lot of different texts that explain what that is. But it's important to understand it's not a monolith as a community. So there's OSR retro clones, and these are games that literally want to replicate first and second edition, right? And that's what they're about. They're about playing that style. And so possibly maybe what he's seeing about people saying to play it a certain way is that, because in retro clones, there is a certain way. It's first edition, trying to recreate it, right? Then there's OSR adjacent games, which is what we're playing. And that's stuff like Morkborg and Karn, and there's a whole slew of them, and Into the Odd. These are ones that are inspired by these old games, and they borrow certain principles, not all of them. It's the same thing in our case. We don't use all the principles of the old school style. Like high lethality isn't necessarily something that we ascribe to. Mm-hmm. And in the OSR adjacent games, they're more modern and they're closer to, say, PBTA, Powered by the Apocalypse, than they are trad games like the 5e, for example. And in that community, I've never encountered people saying this is how you have to play, because the whole point of it is to say there isn't a right way to play. That's why we have gaps in the rules. That's why there's a lot of interpretation. Every table is different. And OSR adjacent games like celebrate that. Now, I will say, too, on top of that, every community has its gatekeepers. I'm all over the communities out there because I'm constantly trying to soak up ideas people have, like PBTA, for example. The gatekeepers there are the ones who say, oh, you don't understand Powered by the Apocalypse. You're playing it wrong whenever you complain about anything, right? That's the gatekeepers there. The gatekeepers in 5e are the ones who say, this build is broken, or this build is stupid, or it's not powerful enough. You're not doing it right, right? So there's these gatekeepers are everywhere. I don't think it's fair to say that OSR has a hallmark of gatekeeping. That doesn't make sense to me. I think perhaps where you might see that, the gatekeepers there are the ones in the retro clones who are trying to gatekeep the way of playing the old 1E and 2E games. And I think they have a point there. Certainly they shouldn't be dicks about it, but that's the kind of game you would want to play if you're playing retro clones. And this is not a retro clone.
Mm-hmm. All right. And we have one final question from Diplo, who says, how do you feel about the dichotomy and split that often exists in the TTRPG fandom on if it should be player-driven or not for the story, along with how that interacts with story gaming concepts?
I can punt this to my companions here, but my simple answer is that the quote-unquote the story is whatever is player-driven. And the way that OSR Plus is designed is that's how it has to be. So like your session 0 story hooks determine what the story is. You as a GM come in with a premise, you come in with an idea of what the setting's going to be about. Say you want it to be about horror and discovering your inner fears and all that, blah, blah, blah. But your players then tell you what they're interested in doing, and then the story is driven by those story hooks.
I would just like to add that if you don't want your players interacting and help create the story, then write a fucking book. All right, don't be trying to play a game at a table if you're just going to railroad it and I have no interaction with that world or effect beyond rolling dice. Like 5e games don't lead in, especially the Dungeon Master Guide does not tell you to do this, but they don't ask you to be an active participant in the world building as a player. OSR Plus definitely does that. I can't speak for other OSR games, but I feel like that's kind of a common theme in them, is a more player interaction. And I can't imagine going back to anything else, after especially the way that we go into it and how deep we get into it.
Yeah, and it's been cool to see Daniel build campaigns around what the players want to do, around what their characters are, as characters. Like that God Beyond the Portal campaign that Rob, you had played in, that sort of first iteration of it. I imagine that your playthrough was so much different than what we're doing now, like just based on what your own characters' backgrounds were and where they were from and how they interacted with the world versus how we're doing it in our current one. Like my character worships a certain kind of elder god who's kind of frowned upon. And it turns out that other people in the city are worshiping him too. So I have these plot points to connect with. I have these characters to interact with that I'm drawn to. Or John's character is like an ex-soldier, and stuff from his military past has come up in some interesting ways. And so there are all these ways that even though it's like the same setting, you can really change it and shift it to be what the characters are adapted to and what the players really want to accomplish in the game.
And also, I believe in your iteration, Rob, you guys, you had to end it early, I know, but you guys got like four sessions, was it? 4, 5, 6?
I think it was closer to 6,
Yeah.
I believe.
And you guys got to the halfway point with that. We're currently at session 13, I think, coming up, or 14. Yeah, and
We
we're
haven't
still
reached the cult yet, buddy. Remember?
Yeah.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. They haven't gotten
Holy
to.
shit.
They're just gonna meet Annika now. That's how far they're.
But
Yeah.
the world that we built is insane.
Yeah.
Like the nuance to it, and the personal touches, and the, like I said, like Courtney has made speeches where she made me as a player feel bad about my character's decisions. I was going to come back with something smart ass, and I was like, nope. He puts his eyes to the ground like a dog that's just peed on the carpet, and
That's absolutely wild to me, because I know that I talked to Courtney about this a little bit, where you guys spent like 4 hours in a dungeon that we literally walked right past.
in 10 minutes.
Yeah, well, it's because it's like, listen, how do we get out of this prison? And I'm like, I'm going to set a fire, and while the guards deal with that, we're going to walk out the fucking front door.
They literally walked out like in a movie with the explosion.
Yeah. And like, well, that's what happens when I ask the question, hey, how much like lantern oil is in this barrack area? And Daniel's like, oh, there's a bunch. And I'm like, good.
And it was so great seeing that too, because in my head I'm comparing, the different choices people have made. And what's funny is, when I'm thinking about the premise, I set it all up, like similar characters came out of it. Like Rob's character and John's have a similar sort of setup and origin, but they ended up playing out totally differently. And what's also interesting is like the mood of the setting, the same behaviors came out. Like Rob originally was inspired to do these monologues, and then the players now, even though that's a mechanic that's defined, like they're also just doing it. It's weird that the setting kind of makes you behave a certain way,
Well, I think that for my character, especially in that game, it was kind of a necessity, because like I was having these like long conversations with Daniel about like the thought process of my character, and like the other players had no idea what was going on. And Daniel's like, you got to get that out, because otherwise they're just going to think you're a fucking monster. And then like I have like this scene with like a dying admiral, and like kind of
they just did that.
Yeah. And it was just like, oh man, this is, and it's like, oh, he isn't just a monster. He has a deep sense of humanity. He's just a broken man. And then I remember like that was a big shift in the table that night as well, when people were like, oh, he's not just like a slab of iron who like hits stuff, right? And I thought that was a really fun and interesting kind of exploration of that.
That moment is always like pretty wild, because we just did that moment and it was almost the same feeling, right? With meeting that dying soldier.
But a completely different character. It wasn't my character shares the same archetype as yours and shares some traits and whatnot, but it was a completely different character who is started off as a shy thing, and she's now growing into her own leadership roles and taking on her own responsibility in life. But still, like, it created that touching moment.
Yeah, there's a lot of changes that had to have happened, because I'm thinking about that, and I met that character after our encounter with the cults. So stuff had to get switched around and moved. Yeah, that's interesting.
The magic of Justin Alexander's book. Go buy his book.
We can never simp enough for Justin Alexander.
I will. I'm friggin'. He's my boyfriend at this point.
Okay. I think it's time for us to transition over to everyone's favorite portion of the interview process, where we roll some dice and create a jam ready to go. So our genre for the jam this time is going to be... Oh, this is a good one for Courtney. We've got body horror on the list. The theme that we're going to be running is... the theme is secrets. So we've got secrets as a theme. And the focus, the thing that we're focusing on first is... interesting. The downfall of something important. So we've got body horror with a theme of secrets and the downfall of something important. Where do we want to start, folks?
Probably the something important, yeah?
Yeah. Right away, I'm thinking it's some sort of like royalty that's been propped up for very long. That's actually some amalgamation of all these like bodies, and maybe it's like the whole royal line is embedded in one form. And the secret is perhaps on the verge of being revealed, which would lead to the downfall of this royal line.
Oh, okay. When I hear that, I also can't help but think of like the Habsburg chin, and massive incest has led to the degradation of this massive like noble amalgam, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's what's happened, is that they've become so inbred that normally you can have this flesh amalgam that is a ruling class, but something's happened where it's become more and more unstable as they maintain the bloodline, so to speak.
Can we throw in, so Courtney introduced me to Scavenger's Reign, this amazing sci-fi cartoon about like alien biology, and a lot of other stuff. Can we say remember the old lady with the horrifying thing?
Yep.
Spoil anything? Can we say that this family has some sort of like massive parasite thing that changes their biology that they've lived with over the generations? Maybe it makes them powerful.
Oh, it's like riding. It's like
maybe it's like symbiosis with it somehow. And that's what it's just like Rob was saying. Like there's a lot of inbreeding because of it.
Are you guys familiar with the Foundation series, Asimov? It's now a TV show too.
I only watched the first season of the show. I haven't read the book though.
But just like I was thinking along those concepts, basically the idea is that there's the emperor of like the known world or known universe, clones themselves. And there's always an elder version, a middle-aged or later 20s version, and a younger version that live together and they rule over. But they're just clones. And not to spoil anything, but something happens along that line throughout the year. And the story it's a pretty cool story. It takes place over hundreds of years. Kind of jumps around these different time periods to kind of build this universe. But I see it as something like that, whereas we're saying that it's not even just inbreeding, but maybe it's just this, they keep reinventing themselves, and it's actually just this parasite that's within them that keeps moving from body to body. So it's basically the same mind that's running it, but it's running these, the new leader, no matter who you vote for, you're still getting the parasite.
Yeah. You said maybe not inbreeding, but I do still want to keep that aspect because it's gross. And I'm picturing like this this gross flesh beast thing below the castle, below the throne room or something that is like mind controlling in part the royal family to basically interbreed because it wants some perfect form that it's after, which is of course horrible and grotesque and disgusting. But it's been like doing this for generations and generations, influencing them.
All right. I, like Courtney, also want to keep the inbreeding. I fully support Courtney in her desire for inbreeding, for sure. I have an idea though. I love the idea that there is something that is mind controlling individual nobles in the pursuit of something that is a perfect creation. However, I want to keep the giant flesh pile of like myriad like old nobles. What I'd like to think instead is that when the parasite gets bored of one of these bodies, they toss it into this that gets reincorporated into a flesh soup, right? So it's like it's just a pile of rejects effectively. And by the way, we can all imagine that there's a revolution coming, and once that revolution happens, the parasite's just going to take over the new leader, right? Like to maintain this veneer of, control by the humanoid citizen.
That's the end credits scene, right?
Yeah.
No, the secret is exposed, right? There is the flesh pile gets lit on fire or dissolved in some way, and then the king dies, and then you cut to the leader of the revolution, who's now part of a council, right? Like it's switched to democracy. And then there's like some telltale sign that all of the members of that democratic council have been converted as well.
Yeah.
It's like what's the Jordan Peele movie? The first breakout one?
Get out.
Get out.
Yeah, that's giving me some vibes with the coagula kind of deal. But in this case, we got a fucking flesh pile, which is better.
Did you have to go down and bang the flesh pile in the basement?
Well, maybe you do.
I hope so.
And then you get absorbed. When you bang it, you get absorbed.
You bang this woman or thing that's attached to the flesh pile, and then it absorbs you as you're banging it.
It's like the mother that's like the great grandmother of this line that's been kept alive.
And it's like this whole ritual where you like derobe into the nude and stuff like that and accept yourself into it. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah, no, that's awful and horrible, and I love it. So
I love this. This is great.
Look, it's body horror. You should be squirming when you're thinking about it. Okay?
Do you get to pick your hole, or is there a sanction one?
There's lots of holes.
I'm gonna guess that they make like a chorus of mouths, right?
Yeah,
like just like a panoply of orifices for you to pleasure yourself with. So
horrible. Oh, it's kind of like, what's the movie that Courtney that you made us watch? So we all just such a horrifying scene at the end. The dancers that you love so much. God Almighty!
Oh, Suspiria's great.
Like
yeah.
Oh man.
Oh, yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm down for that.
Yeah. By the way, both Suspirias are good for different reasons, but the remake is quite special.
I still need to watch the original. I don't know. I keep putting
the original is very, very different.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway. Okay. All right. I'm happy here. Yes. We've got flesh piles, we've got orifices, we've got royalty and a cut scene, so we're good. I think now normally, right? Like we'd go into the rapid fire questions, but y'all have been here forever. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to put John on the spot here and force him to go through the quick fire ones. So John, my wife wants to know, is soup a cereal?
No, it's not. Just stop.
Oh.
It's not. It's separate things. It's stupid. A hot dog's a hot dog. It's not a fucking sandwich.
It's a sandwich. It's legally a sandwich. It's legally a sandwich. You go to New York, you know what it's called, a hot dog sandwich under legal code, so you can go fuck yourself. I don't know what to tell you.
No. This is the same thing with tomatoes. They're actually, we know they're a fruit biologically, but legally they're a vegetable. So it's don't bring law.
Well, ketchup is also a vegetable. If we want to bring that up.
Well, that's some bullshit other stuff. I know someone that says that there's only 3 types of food. There's a salad, there's a pizza, and there's a sandwich. Everything falls into that, and I have gotten in rage wars with them.
So wait, is cereal just like a grain salad with a
cereal
milk dressing?
Salad. Cereal will be a salad in his opinion.
Milk dressing, grain. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can get into it. I'm there. Sure. If you want to be reductive about like the hero's journey and the 7 stories that have ever been told, we can be reductive about food. Why not?
No. Hard stop on.
One time with John, what was that conversation we had with John, which was like till like 3 in the morning? We made a list and everything.
Oh, about the old people list?
Yes, the old people list. Yeah. What were we trying to get out of him? But we couldn't do it. It was
we were just trying to get across what a hypothetical situation was to him. And like, would you ever eat this? Ever? Would you be willing to eat this? And it was just
impossible.
It was a very long conversation.
I have very, very strong opinions on food. It's
I mean, he's owned 2 restaurants. That's why.
Yeah, but what's wild to me, John, is that you're friends with Daniel, who has like some of the worst food takes I've ever heard. And like,
I agree, but I've also gotten him to eat some things that he never would have thought he would eat.
Soup.
What about a burrito? Have you gotten him into the burrito yet?
He doesn't like eat with his hands.
Made it. Oh. Yeah, I would try it.
Yeah, I'd cut it up for him first, though.
Yeah. It's just like they're like rings of burrito, so you can see all the way through it.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this quickly devolved into something that wasn't a rapid fire question. So, John, I guess, what other questions do I even ask you guys? I don't even remember anymore. I feel like it's been so long. All right. Well, fuck it. We're just gonna skip to the end, I guess. Fuck this. So, John.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about someone else who isn't yourself that you'd like to promote.
someone else that isn't myself, well, it's not myself directly, but I'd like to promote our the OSR Plus YouTube channel, which is now putting out its shorts, which I might edit, but it's not about me. Some episodes are, but, and now I think I'm going to have to dig up our third Dungeons and Flagons, where our illustrious host here, Rob Hilferty, was actually involved. And I remember, I think, about 45 minutes of, because that's when I was dumb and I used to smoke pot before Dungeons and Flagons and then drink copious amounts of amaretto that night. So yeah, that night is a blur. I just woke up with a lot of sticky glasses with sugar ants crawling on them. So that was
hell yeah. Jesus. All right, and finally, where can people find you and your stuff?
People can find me Johnny Law at Johnny Law. It's JONNIELAW on YouTube. I'm not the most consistent, but I'm working on it. I put out some shorts with some not really hot, but just quick takes on what I think about TTRPGs. And I also put some videos both about OSR Plus and some of the rules, as well as just some ways to bring some of the concepts that we explore in that system over to 5e.
You know, I tend to agree with you. Like, if you have good taste, there's no such thing as a hot take, right? You just have really good opinions all the time. So I'm kind of with you on that one.
Yeah,
except about food, Daniel. Except about food, yeah, and other things.
Yeah.
All right. So, Daniel, Courtney, John, thank you all very much. Tell us, where can people find OSR Plus? Where can they go to fulfill their old school Renaissance / revival needs?
You can go to osrplus.com, which is the website, and you should also check us out on YouTube, which actually, what the fuck is the...
It's at OSR Plus.
See, I don't even know how to use YouTube, so that's where you can find
it. Plus is spelled out. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, osrplus.com.
All right. Thank you all for continuing to co-host / be an interviewee, I guess. But seriously, it was a blast. Thank you all very much for coming. I know that it's been a long time in the works, and honestly, this is such a great project. Y'all should definitely go check it out.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend everybody check out the site, and if it looks like something that's of interest to you, join and poke around in the character creator. Join our Discord. We're trying to build up a community on there, and on there you can sign up for games and fill out the schedule so that we can try to get you into like a new player session or a Dungeons and Flagons if you enjoy adult beverages and would like to learn the system that way. And yeah, Daniel runs games all over the place, so there's that always going on. And we have other community stuff like movie nights, usually once a month at least. And so come hang out with us. Have a good time.
Fantastic. So that was a great interview. Fun times were had by all, especially John. But with that, that's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow some instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're on YouTube, where you can just find us on YouTube and click subscribe. Don't do anything else. Just subscribe. That's it. You can also go to our Twitter at Let's Worldbuild. And if you want to talk to us more directly, you can go to our Discord channel with a link for that in the description. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always give us money over on Patreon, where you'll get access to sweet, sweet patron-only goodies like Too Hot for Broadcast, which there might be a Too Hot for Broadcast in this episode. We'll see how it kind of gets cut up. But among other things, you get the Aphid Lounge, Too Hot for Broadcast, and others. So if you want to support us or just say thank you for the podcast, you can go and do so on our Patreon. That's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week.